For the past couple of weeks, the world has looked on in horror as one man with an unfortunate arm spasm took over the US federal government. He's taken control of every government office, canceled programs people rely on, and brought in a bunch of neo-Nazi child traffickers to scoop up everyone's data. As of writing, no one has stopped him. Why is it one person can have so much power? Why is it laws and constitutions and consequences in general only apply to you and me and not to guys like Elon and Trump? A lot of people online have realized things are in crisis, that the time to act is now, and the thing we need to do is blame and mock other people. Democratic politicians have leapt into action by shrugging and talking about the Constitution and how someone should do something.
We've tried nothing and we're all out of ideas.
No matter what symbolic gestures the Democrats come up with to make it look like they care, they will never acknowledge that the real problem is the system as a whole. They'll never tell you the state, the law, capitalism, or the accumulation of wealth is the problem. Their job is to tell you everything else is the problem. Today we're looking at the roots of many of the world's problems, what people blame for our problems, and why there's so little overlap between the two. I'm Chris, and welcome back to the channel for the diabolically disobedient. If you want to support this channel, check out my merch store. Actually, it's just a mug with "It Had to Be Said" written on it in marker. You probably don't want it. Ever get mad at people? Of course you do. There are so many jerks out there. And even people trying not to be jerks can get in your way, slow you down, hold you back, and step on your toes. When we're mad, we care less about reasons and causes. It's easiest to get angry at the people nearest us, or the people on TV. When people like me come along and say the problem is capitalism, or the state, or the white supremacist, ableist, cis-hetero patriarchy, it's harder to get mad at that. They're not tangible things we can point to and fantasize about hurting. How do you stop a system? How do you even know it exists? And what else could exist in its absence? Another thing that's really easy to do is find reasons. Are you a Democrat? It's those damn Republicans. Are you a Republican? It's probably a conspiracy of Jews, gays, drug gangs, and the deep state. Blame might reside with that other party, people from that country or race, trans people, disabled people. Yes, disabled people get the blame too, but it's definitely not me and my group. Making up reasons to explain away the effects of their policies will get more common as the Fourth Reich attempts to remove every program and law that could possibly be used to protect anyone who isn't rich. Fascists are always making up reasons. Since the election of Donald Trump to the White House a couple of months ago, liberals have been fighting tooth and nail to stop Trump from implementing his policies. Just kidding. They've actually been throwing blame around like a dodgeball. Every day they're making posts and entering comment sections to tell non-voters, third-party voters, student protesters, trans people, black people, Palestinians, anyone who admits they didn't vote Democrat, that it's all their fault this is happening and they deserve what's coming. They say things like, Trump will be bad for Palestinians, so if you didn't vote Democrat, you're to blame for whatever happens to Palestinians. Well, Biden shipped tens of billions of dollars in arms to Israel and gave it the green light. So if you voted Democrat in the last election, doesn't that make you complicit in their war on Gaza? No, of course not. Only other people are to blame for the issues you say you care about. If I sound angry, it's 'cause I am. This is why so many people say they hate liberals. They sit back and smugly blame everyone else and laugh at their misfortune. They try to take over the conversation and waste the time of people who want to do something. Block. What these people are telling you is they're willing to use black people or Palestinians or whoever else is suffering to blame everyone else. It's not surprising. We saw them throwing Palestinians under the bus for months before the election. Stop talking about Palestine and the Democrats' role in creating this mess. It's almost election time. The truth could hurt my candidate. Liberals say unite when they mean shut up and do as I say, and if you don't, they cry about it for years and fantasize about your execution at the hands of the Reich they never did anything to stop because they thought appeasement was more pragmatic. Now they're allowed to pretend they care again, they've got self-righteous. I voted, therefore I took a brave stand against fascism, and everything that happens now is someone else's fault. I'm going back to brunch. I'm sure liberals in 1933 Germany felt the same. You can't spend years saying, if you don't vote, Trump will kill the transgenders, he'll put people of color in work camps, he'll ban birth control, this is so important, and then just give up like none of that shit matters to you without accepting or offloading culpability for said surrender. Some Democrats have made chiding everyone to their left their whole online personality. Instead of going out there and actually stopping the Republicans from doing what we know they're doing, these people think passing blame around is a better use of their time. There are bigger questions here. Why are the only viable options in your so-called democracy the corporate party that just offers reassurances and the techno-fascist party that wrecks everything? Why is it such an unrepresentative system? And why do you still believe in it? Why would it be morally correct to follow all of its rules? Because the system makes them correct? Yes, so, because if you assume the political system is legitimate, you're assuming everything your candidates and parties do with power is legitimate. So everything the other party does is legitimate too. Talk all you want about legality and unconstitutionality, but despite using those words, neither party has ever really cared about those things, and that's not about to start now. What's the difference between a law made by a fascist Republican Party and a law made by a gang that claims to control your neighborhood? How is one more legitimate than another? Because one of them worked through the system? Liberals are not alone in missing the big picture. Everyone wants to blame someone. I think if they understood the state better, that's where they would look first. So what is the state? Don't think of the state as a thing, a group of people, places, buildings, flags, or uniforms. It's a set of institutions, or as Erik Laursen puts it, an operating system that provides an encompassing social, cultural, and functional environment for its users. While the state is a creation of human beings, it also molds and directs them, limits and guardrails their aspirations and ambitions such that they conform to and support its objectives. Wherever you are, your job in life is to do what the state expects of you. The state encompasses political parties and pressure groups of all sorts, households, small and large businesses, non-profit organizations, trade unions, and neighborhood community associations. Both private and public education are parts of the state. Patriotic and religious organizations are components, since they encourage us to be loyal to and work through the state. Most importantly, capital is part of the state, supplying the economic engine it needs to grow and reproduce itself while depending on it for the various conditions necessary for capitalist enterprise to function and for protection and rescue when it regularly overreaches. The state legalizes and criminalizes according to the commercial interests of its owners. The law grants a moral quality to behavior it allows and prohibits. So if you're operating within the law, your behavior is legitimate. And if you step outside it, you deserve punishment. We get taught to believe the state is consistently the protagonist, the hero we're meant to root for to score the winning goal, the general who pulls victory from the mouth of disaster, the Moses leading us to the promised land of order, prosperity, and contentedness. The vast majority of mainstream political practitioners and observers typically accept the modern state, which is merely 500 years old, as a given that can be reformed but not superseded. Outside the state is the void. There is no alternative to working within the system because outside of it there is nothing and no one. If we attempt to organize or create a society without it, we're doomed to irrelevance or disaster. And yet people work for each other, provide for each other, make plans, and carry them out successfully outside the state every day. Subcultures and informal organization rise and fall without the permission of the state. Whole movements emerge to challenge the rule of the state. To think we can't run a society without something to force us is a result of our indoctrination, not our observation. Some people would say the problem is capitalism as distinct from the state. Capitalism is the dominant economic system in the world today. It seems weird to think it couldn't be to blame for any of the world's problems. We will talk about it in this video. The thing is, when people blame capitalism, they're blaming the state. Capitalism is not and has never been separate from the state. Capitalism originates everywhere in plunder. The state confers legitimacy on the act of plunder and usually does the plundering itself. States, or possibly gangs or corporations acting as mini-states, go somewhere, claim the land as their own, and force the people living on it to work for them. They make the laws now, so they introduce money, private property, markets, and wage labor. Nowadays, capitalism is the main driving force of the state. And just like the state, we never hear the capitalist system take the blame. I never hear the word capitalism on the news. In most of my classes on politics and economics, we rarely ever said the word. I still didn't understand capitalism as a system when I graduated. I just knew it was better than so-called communism like the Soviet Union. It turned out they were all just different flavors of states. But I never stopped reading, and as I read more about capitalism and its origins, I got a clearer picture of what it was. There's a link to a series in the description that goes into much more depth than I'm going to go into here. Here I'll just read from The Origin of Capitalism by Meiksins-Wood and highlight a few features of capitalism that would have helped me put into context what I was learning in university. Capitalism is a system in which goods and services down to the most basic necessities of life are produced for profitable exchange, where even human labor power is a commodity for sale in the market, and where all economic actors are dependent on the market. This distinct system of market dependence means that the requirements of competition and profit maximization are the fundamental rules of life. Because of those rules, capitalism is a system uniquely driven to improve the productivity of labor by technical means, so they can pay people less. Automation is an example of this. So everything is commodified and sold, firms driven to maximize profits compete in markets, and they do whatever they can to pay their workers less. Above all, it's a system in which the bulk of society's work is done by propertyless laborers who are obliged to sell their labor power in exchange for a wage in order to gain access to the means of life and of labor itself. The basic objective of the capitalist system is the production and self-expansion of capital. How did everyone become propertyless? Their land was taken from them. All over the world. The state declared it all legal, granting property rights to those who owned property, entrenching inequality. If not for property, if land weren't owned exclusively, if housing were built for people to live in, if goods were made to meet our needs, they could be made available to everyone, not just whoever can afford them. Money and owning stuff, of course, predate the capitalist state. The difference is, under capitalism, all hierarchical social institutions facilitate the accumulation of wealth. If I had realized all that at university, or had just learned an honest history in high school, I would have understood the world much better, much earlier. I would have realized everything we were reading about globalization, terrorism, and war was just the expansion of capital to more and more parts of the world. Now that the project of globalization is complete, the world has become one big plantation. In complying with the law of always lowering the cost of labor, slavery is an integral part of supply chains for food, clothing, electronics, some of the biggest brands. It's not just something in the past that we abolished. It's something all over the world in the present. Slavery and other forms of coerced labor have always been integral to capitalism because states and empires have been using them for thousands of years. It's possible we're in a period of transition from capitalism to technofeudalism, or maybe technofascism. Isn't the state awesome? The ideal for a capitalist has always been a monopoly, and it's always been the state that protects monopolies. You get in good with politicians and they pass laws that kill your competition. You get rich from your monopoly so you can afford to buy more politicians and judges and police and so on. In the US, the mask of liberal democracy is finally falling off, and we're seeing a total corporate and fascist takeover of the state. Or maybe it's just capitalism as usual. One guy being rich enough to buy the government is peak capitalism. If no one stops them, they're going to reorganize it to persecute their various political enemies. I don't know why millions of Americans aren't physically attacking the people and burning down the buildings involved in all this. It might just be that they feel alone and don't have an organization to work through. That's easily remedied. Anyway, I still use the word capitalism because even if it's over, it's extremely relevant history. But if I'm talking about the present, everything is up in the air. Regardless of what the system is best named, oppression, division, poverty, and war persist because they are the inevitable result of living under the state. If we say, enough capitalism and feudalism, time for a socialist state, we'll still have oppression, division, poverty, and war, as history has shown. If it helps the people at the top remain at the top, the state will do it. Why don't we learn more about states or how social systems work in school? Let's bear in mind the purpose of school is not to educate us, open our minds, and teach us to think critically. It's to discipline us to be obedient servants to the boss, and to indoctrinate us to believe in every aspect of the system we live under. If you're not convinced, I've made videos. School ultimately serves the same people and systems as all hierarchical social institutions. We learn Richard Scarry civics. Every institution has its place, government represents us, police and military protect us, school educates us, business serves us. The institutions are represented by buildings and colors to humanize them. They become normal life, integral to our identity and sense of community. So if someone wants to change them, it might feel like an attack on you. We feel like we have to pull those people back in to remind them of the reasons we've learned that these institutions exist. Didn't you know we need the state or someone bad might take over? Don't you understand we need money and markets to get anything done? Sure, the police might do bad things sometimes, but we couldn't just abolish them or it will be chaos. Other people's words coming out of our mouths, like catechism, to keep others in the fold and avoid cognitive dissonance. School gives us beliefs that form the foundation of what we come to believe as adults. But the way we learn things in school is not with the ambiguity that intellectual honesty would require. In history class, we don't learn that the events of that time are debated, but that our side won a decisive victory that made us a nation we should be proud of today. The sacred institutions seem to have no origin, no history, just reasons. So there's nothing to ask. When I talk about the state now, people tell me it began as an agreement among all the people. But that's impossible, because it's never asked for the consent of the people it rules. States are not like chieftains and tribes. The proto-state that emerged thousands of years ago was probably a conspiracy to enslave everyone, which is why one consistent feature of states throughout history is forcing the people under their rule to work, to create and sustain a ruling class. If we'd learned that in school, we would have questioned the value of the state. But we're not allowed to question the state. Without the state, it would be chaos. Is that what you want? When we get a single, apparently uncontroversial explanation, as is often the case in school, we don't realize there might be another side to a story. We learn not to ask where the state came from. We don't ask where money came from. We all seem to agree that people used to barter all the time, and one day it just clicked that money would be more efficient. Except there's no evidence for that claim. Money seems to have come along to help kings manage large armies. Before money, before taxes and forced labor, people mostly shared what they produced. And why not? It's not my land, air, water, and sunlight, it's everyone's. But states divide us into owning classes and lower classes, and money makes it seem legitimate. Someone paid for something, so obviously they deserve to own it, even if other people need it, even if it means others have to work just to have the thing they need, even if they go hungry because they can't afford it. Money makes it all fine. We come to believe people with money deserve that money, regardless of how they got it or what they do with it. Yet if you blame the people who own everything for the effects of using the power that comes with wealth, you're a communist. School supplies us with defensive shields that activate as soon as we suspect someone might be left-wing. The whole world is built for people with money, and yet we still defend them. Sure, they're destroying the environment every day, and soon the world will be a giant car park in a desert, but they're creating jobs. We live in a world where some people can have everything in the world, and millions of people live their whole lives in misery as a result. They include people enslaved to dig for minerals, assemble our phones, and sew our shirts. The power of those on the top can only come through huge amounts of violence organized and legitimized by the state. We only become employees because all the resources we need are owned by other people. Violence was used to expropriate these resources. It's used to protect wealth over generations. It's used against people who try to unionize and protest. In order to have cool technology and vast wealth, you need to oppress and impoverish the people who are going to do the work. The state makes life better for some people by taking life away from others. But we don't see them, so we don't care. We don't want to see them. We learn they're just not as good as us. If we actually got to know people, we would know they're not all leeches and thieves like we've been told, but people with the same emotions as us. Along with meeting and learning about different people, I think learning history is one of the best ways to understand the world today. And that's why school does such a poor job of it. We don't understand the state. We don't understand money. We don't see white supremacy as a system, but a marginal belief. Thanks to feminism, we're beginning to see patriarchy as a system, but the best funded political movements still deny it exists. Those movements get their funding from the really wealthy people who would lose the most if women took their power back. These ideologies are central to the state. That's why school avoids teaching them. That's why we don't see them. Outside school, we hear everything and everyone is the problem, except the state. If you're a grifter who wants money and power, you don't want to lose people who believe in the sacred institutions like the state, the country, or capitalism. So they're never the problem. Instead, grifters direct people's anger at institutions toward the same targets those institutions have made vulnerable. Poor people are people who've been robbed by the system, but they stole something from the supermarket, so they're criminals and they're ruining our cities and they belong in prison. The state creates enemies for us by classifying people differently, different racial groups, different genders and sexualities, different nationalities, so it's clear who the good guys are and who's expendable. The state sows divisions so that we never see the state, only people just like us that we can't stand living next to. The state tricks people into dividing themselves. One of the most popular ways people self-segregate is by legal status. I am a law-abiding citizen. We would have a great society if there were no crime, as if that were possible or even desirable. So we have to punish it severely. Not when I do a crime. When I do a crime, it's just a little mischief. I mean, other people deserve to be punished. Nowadays, a lot of blame for whatever goes to so-called illegal immigrants. Why are you poor and unemployed? Illegal immigrants. All citizens would be millionaires, but we're spending $1 trillion a week on illegal immigrants. Couldn't possibly be that a ruling class keeps demanding more of your money and giving you shittier jobs in return. And it's ironic because the right wing will blame immigration for poverty, but they'll also blame you for your own poverty. I guess that's because the right wing is just a collection of fingers pointing at people they don't like and pulling triggers. Why is housing unaffordable? Illegal immigrants are moving in. Either that or landlords buy up all the property and raise the rents whenever they feel like it. Do you think that'll change if they deport people? Is it because of illegal immigrants that property's so concentrated that only a small percentage of us will ever own our own homes? Did migrants cheat millions of people out of their wages? Did they kick millions out of their homes? Did they force rich people to own everything and control the government and make you work for them to survive? The question I most want to ask these people is tyranny acceptable but brown people aren't? Sure seems that way. The right wing has successfully leveraged the fear of dark-skinned migrants to gain power in the US and Europe. One of the overarching conspiracy theories on the right is the Great Replacement. It's their way of sweeping up all the things they don't like into one big pile of nonsense. Because supposedly, white people are being replaced. Immigration? Replacement. Women and black people getting paid fairly? Replacement. Feeling nostalgia? That's because they took something away from you. DEI is part of this conspiracy. DEI stands for black people. It's one of the right-wing's current excuses for everything, as we saw when people blamed the recent fires in Los Angeles on DEI, and Trump blamed the plane crash in Washington, D.C. on DEI, and every black person who isn't at a minimum wage job gets called a DEI hire. Like all the right-wing's reasons, it's hard to know if anybody actually believes this stuff, or if it's just another word they've agreed is their excuse to be racist. That's why it's so hard to take any of them on good faith. They'll see Elon supporting Nazis and spreading Nazi BS and literally doing a Nazi salute and say, no, you don't understand. That wasn't what it looked like. That wasn't what it obviously was. Do they believe that? It doesn't matter. They're supporting this situation either way. But then, is it their fault? What hope do they have of understanding the world when the media call Nazis Maoists? So we get distracted and the grifters get speaking tours. We want to make things better, but instead of looking at the system that enables a few people to have all the money and power, we go after more vulnerable people. As Naomi Klein says in Doppelganger, conspiracy theories rile up anger about the Davos elites at big tech and big pharma. But the rage never seems to reach those targets. Instead, it gets diverted into culture wars about anti-racist education, all-gender bathrooms, and great replacement panic directed at black people, non-white immigrants, and Jews. Meanwhile, the billionaires who bankroll the whole charade are safe in the knowledge that the fury coursing through our culture isn't coming for them. But it's not just conspiracy theories that divert our gaze from the state. It's not conspiracy theory to say something is human nature, it's just simplistic. Everything under the state gets called human nature, despite these highly artificial conditions. Some cultures are so patriarchal it seems like they've always been, when in reality, patriarchy is an invention, just like all ideologies. It has a history, causes, policies, and pretty much requires a police state to enforce it. Nationalism is human nature, as if we evolved in groups of millions of people to go to war with our neighbors. Accumulating wealth is human nature, as if we have some natural impulse to own something exclusively and charge everyone else if they want to use it. You might even have heard the entire capitalist system is just releasing our productive forces in a way older systems held back. But it's an invention, with its own laws and incentives that people are compelled to accept. It's not something that could exist in the absence of force. You might have heard war is human nature, but that doesn't explain anything. If by human nature you mean it's within our nature, we have the capacity to do something, then that's obvious. But that's a bit like saying supersonic flight is in our nature. We can do it if lots of people work together with the right knowledge, tools, and motivation, but people want to imply war is inevitable because we're human. For one thing, there are no wars that can be attributed solely to human nature. Human nature tells us nothing about causes. No wars have been inevitable simply because of some inescapable fact of who we are. In fact, every war has been avoidable. If it had been avoided, the absence of war could have been drawn out longer, maybe indefinitely. Wars occur because people who have the power to make war believe they will benefit from doing so, and millions of people obey. If it becomes impossible for people to have or use that power, say if enough people disobey, there can't be a war. That's what I want. A world where no one can enslave others or start wars because the systems and beliefs necessary to do so don't exist anymore. But under this system, war benefits a few people, so we have war. Someone once told me racism was human nature. Nah. Sure, we notice differences like skin color. Doesn't mean we should feel animosity or contempt for people who are different. No, racism is mostly just another effect of statism. Rulers hand us scapegoats to fight, so we forget to fight our rulers. It's much easier to just take your aggression out on vulnerable people than confront the real enemy. Racism as we know it dates back to the golden age of imperialism, colonialism, and slavery in the early days of capitalism. The European empires were expanding because capitalists wanted more capital from more parts of the world. They wanted a captive workforce, so they enslaved millions of Africans and quite a few other people too. They started treating black people as inferior to white people, legally and socially, turning what would become the United States into a white supremacist society over time. It has never escaped its racist roots and, in my opinion, can't. The point is, racism is a political ideology that serves the ruling class and divides everyone else, and that's why it still exists. Racism is still employed every day all over the world to divide us against each other and suppress the wages of anyone who doesn't fit the mold. I don't know if I believe anyone who voted for Trump really thinks their wages will go up and rent will go down because the state is going to deport people, but if they do, they are quite mistaken. They will remain in debt in their low-wage jobs and tiny apartments, and their lives will not get any better. Will they ever learn they were being manipulated? Or do they prefer not to know? After all, one of the features of modern propaganda is how soothing it all is. Don't worry about anything, citizen. Your elected representatives will solve it. It's comforting to believe that the state protects us and our rights and freedoms, or at least that it's supposed to, and we can make it if we just try hard enough. We get confused when the state doesn't work the way we were taught. This must be an anomaly. The system must be broken, corrupted, and in need of a savior. But the system can't just be whatever we want it to be, or else the well-meaning politicians would have changed it generations ago. The state is working as intended. There's no way to take it back because we never had it. It can't be reorganized to work for the people, because the state has only ever been intended to serve a tiny ruling minority. So why don't we act accordingly? Why do we walk around pretending we're in a democracy? Maybe we just don't want to see. Some people refuse to see evidence that their beliefs are wrong, especially about institutions they identify with. This is my country. How could it be wrong? Or maybe the true explanation seems too mundane to be true. The reason the rich get richer and the poor get poorer is because of policy and violence and private ownership of resources and ideologies that support these forces. So the same problems as for thousands of years now. But they're not exciting enough for the 21st century, so now we have space lasers causing fires and geoengineered storms creating hurricanes. It's tough to live in a moment when so many truths that have been sold as settled suddenly become wobbly and wavy under our feet. It's especially tough at a time when a great deal else feels uncertain. The possibility of owning a home, or scraping together enough money for soaring rents, or holding on to any given job, or even knowing how much the basics of life are going to cost week to week. It's all tilting and rolling, and so much like the assured predictability of seasons will never be stable again. All of this destabilization places demands on us to change, to reassess, and to reimagine who we need to become. It shouldn't be a surprise that a moment this demanding is conjuring up some extreme behaviors and apparitions. It shouldn't be a surprise that instead of looking squarely at what's been revealed in wave after wave of unveiling, the nurses forced to wear garbage bags instead of proper protective gear, the cool hatred in Derek Chauvin's eyes as he pressed his weight onto George Floyd's neck, the perversion of the priests, the skies stained orange from wildfires. Many are opting for some rather spectacular distractions, including the distraction of casting themselves as cosmic victims of every crime against humanity of the past 500 years combined. That might explain why liberals are blaming the rest of us. Blaming others for not doing something that might have had a minuscule effect on a system that doesn't work for us is a distraction too. While we were distracting each other, the world's most powerful man took personal control of the state. He used his wealth to increase his influence, and his influence to increase his wealth. It's tough to piece together all the reasons we've been told and see the state behind them. Some people try to question everything but don't realize oppressive systems and ideologies all originate with or take place under the approving eye of the state. It's not that some corporate executives are doing terrible things and should be individually punished. The law incentivizes them to do terrible things. If you work for a corporation, your job is to reproduce capital. That might mean tricking more customers into going deeper into debt, lobbying for monopoly power, or converting ever more natural resources into consumer products. If you work for the state, your job is to facilitate the reproduction of capital, to keep the wheels rolling. That might mean getting more people to work, which is why you hear politicians in the right wing talking about getting more people off welfare and disability and into the labor force or prison. So it's not that some sinister cabal of Jews or something is enslaving people. Corporations are incentivized to enslave people, so they do. It's not that someone's controlling the weather. Capitalism is eating up nature and fueling climate change, and it can't stop. It's not structurally capable of stopping. You would have to completely change the laws, and no one with the power to do that would gain from it. There's no green capitalism and no serious plans to implement it anyway, because countless industries would lose money, and we can't have that. Legislation is not written for us. Our interests are usually antithetical to the private accumulation of wealth and power. I'm going to close this video by opening the topic of what we can do about it. Because it's such a broad question, I'll let you watch the playlist in the description for the longer version. But what are some potential first steps one could take to attack this system? Should you try to stop capital or the state? Business people or the police? High-level meetings or daily operations? Yes, because it's all connected, an attack on one part is an attack on the whole thing. There's probably more than one way you can contribute. It takes sustained, coordinated effort over many years, but it's possible to end the state. Systems have beginnings and they have ends. We can be part of bringing this one to an end. But even if you don't want to end the system, let's agree on class solidarity. The ruling class already has a great measure of class solidarity, and it spends considerable resources trying to trick and divide the rest of us. We should be united despite superficial differences like where we're born and what we look like. Anyone who wants to end capitalism, police, prisons, white supremacy, patriarchy, and all other authoritarianism fights the same fight. The long-term goal should be the elimination of the state and all social hierarchy. Over time, we should be moving away from state institutions to governance and economies that serve everyone. That might involve a lot of meeting and talking. It might mean planting, feeding, building, fixing, and repurposing. It'll feature a lot of educating, sharing, and working together. It'll definitely mean attacking and defending. But you won't be alone. You'll find your place, do what you can, and be able to say you did something. And that'll just make you want to do more. So find your people. Find people who are doing it for themselves. Find people who are ready to make things better. And tell them all to subscribe to my channel.